Hey, Metal Dave here, along with my co-host Jason McMaster, and welcome to another episode of that Talk Louder podcast. Today, we are dedicating the entire episode to one of the greatest bands of all time. That band is Judas Priest. And we're going to do this every once in a while, where we're going to just dedicate a show to an artist or a band that is so awesome, that has made such an impact on me and Jason, on rock and roll in general, on heavy metal in general, that they deserve the entire show. And Judas Priest certainly qualifies as one of those bands. We'll get to all things Judas Priest in just a minute, but first bring in Jason and tell me what's going on with you. You got anything happening this week?
Man, it's, the day in the life is just, I'm teaching most of the time. I'm working on music, when I'm not teaching and or I'm doing this, we usually tape these on a Friday or a Sunday, and those happen to be my days off. So
yeah.
That's about it. Talk Louder has become a part of my routine, and I really like it. It's easy to schedule because as the world knows, we're still in a bit of a indecisive safety issue because of the virus and the variants, and so this is taking up my time, and it's keeping me safe, and will continue to do so. But I do feel like I see a pinhole of light.
Yeah.
Let's do some shows coming up.
I hope so. I hope so.
I do. That's not really, I'm not saying anything. I'm not letting it. There's no cat. There's no bag. So there's no cat out of the bag. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we're about to turn the corner on this, because I'm ready for some live music myself. In the meantime, though, like you, I spend my time gearing up for Talk Louder. I love it. It's fun. I'm still listening to music when I'm during my downtime. I revisited a Ramones record the other night, Mondo Bizarro. It came out in 1992, and it's not necessarily the greatest Ramones record, but it definitely has some awesome moments on it. It's the first album to feature CJ on bass.
Yeah, I was going to say no Dee Dee on that record. I have an autographed copy of that record, actually.
Dee Dee is not listed as one of the musicians, nor does he play on it, but he contributed a lot of songs to that record. He wrote about 3 or 4 songs at least on that album, and a couple of them CJ actually does the lead vocals on. And those are actually the best songs on the album, are the ones that Dee Dee wrote. He wrote Poison Heart, he wrote Main Man, and he wrote Strength to Endure.
Is that personal opinion, or has that have been written in history books as facts that the Dee Dee songs that CJ sings are the best songs on Mondo Bizarro?
No, I'm saying that the songs that Dee Dee wrote are the best songs in my opinion.
So okay.
Yeah, and CJ sang 2 out of the 3.
2 out.
Right. So Poison Heart is Joey singing. Main Man and Strength to Endure is CJ on lead vocals. And it's a good album in that regard. It was the introduction of CJ. It was DJ or CJ's sort of outgoing type album, where he contributed songs but wasn't really in the band anymore. But the songs he contributed were great. And
Dee Dee,
yeah.
Tribute, yeah.
So Dee Dee's presence is on that album, although he was technically officially out of the band and not playing on the album. But it definitely has a lot of Dee Dee's stamp all over it. And CJ stepped up and did a great job filling in for Dee Dee as a bass player, as a showman. He was a great kick in the pants when the band kind of needed it. He brought this youthful energy. He reminds me, in a sense, of, how when Cliff Burton died and Metallica brought in Jason Newsted, it was like they found the one and only guy on planet Earth that could do that job and do it justice. And I've always felt the same way about CJ, because Dee Dee was, irreplaceable, let's face it. But if he had to be replaced, CJ was the man to do it, and he did a great job.
Oh, yeah.
I saw that tour, the Mondo Bizarro tour here in Austin in 1992. It was the first time I ever had the chance to interview the Ramones and meet them. It might not have been a first interview. I might have interviewed them by telephone, but it was the first time I met them in person. And the weird thing is, I'm making my way through the corridors of the venue during sound check or just before sound check, and I passed CJ in a stairwell, and I don't even recognize him because he's got this long, heavy metal hair, and he's wearing a t-shirt with the sleeves cut off, and he's got all these tattoos. He looked like a roadie to me. So we passed each other in the stairwell, and he's like, "Hey man, how's it going?" I was like, "Hey man, how you doing?" "All right, right on, brother. See you later." And next thing I know, I'm watching sound check, and he's on stage, singing Joey's lead vocals and doing the mic check and the sound check and all that stuff. And I realized, right then and there, wow, I just passed CJ in the stairwell and didn't even realize it was him.
Sounds like he is the roadie.
He might have been. Yeah, that might have been his initiation. I don't know. But yeah, 1992 Mondo Bizarro, not a bad Ramones album, and a great introduction for CJ.
I think they did an in-store that day, and a friend of mine went down there and got that record signed and gave it to me later. It wasn't on my agenda to stand in line and get the Ramones autograph, but it was a nice gift.
Well, the funny thing
I don't hate the record. I like the record.
Yeah, the funny thing that day is, so I'm interviewing the band. Actually, I was interviewing Marky backstage, and Joey and Johnny showed up during the interview. So I got to meet them, although I wasn't really interviewing them. And I had that record with me. So I got Joey, Marky, and Johnny to sign the album. And I walked away without it being signed by CJ, who I passed in the stairwell and never even realized it was him.
Whoops.
So about, I don't know, 20 years later, he played a gig in San Antonio post Ramones. It was a CJ Ramone gig. And I took that vinyl and I told him the story, and I finally got it signed by he finally added the missing signature many, many years later.
Yeah, that happens sometimes, and when you're a bit of a collector or a fan or something. Sorry, my reverb came on. Or you're a fan or something, and then you're missing that one signature, and like you were there, and you just whoops, right?
Yeah,
you got caught up in something else. It's interesting.
Exactly. Well, I wasn't used, he was new to the band, and he was wearing cutoff sleeves, and he had a bunch of tattoos. I'm used to seeing the Ramones in black leather jackets and bowl cuts, and this guy looked like a biker that just stepped off a Harley, and so I totally spaced on him in the stairwell, but he made good on it 20 years later. So. This is a good one, folks. Judas Priest. I mean, we could go on and on and on about Judas Priest, but we'll try to contain ourselves. One of the greatest metal bands of all time, it goes without saying. A huge influence on Jason, a huge influence on me as a fan. A great catalog. They basically sort of, in many ways, defined the genre. But Jason, we'll start with you. What was your first discovery of Judas Priest? When were you first made aware of their existence? Was it an album? Was it a concert? Tell me.
I'm not gonna lie. There's a lot of things about it that in my story and my sort of relationship with Judas Priest that would pay off a little bit later. But my younger brother Randy is the one who turned me on to Judas Priest. Now, I think that he heard about it from some neighborhood friends whose older brothers had turned them on to Judas Priest. And Randy brought home Unleashed in the East. So
Oh,
that was, 78 or something, right? 77, 78. So the band had already been around and had, 3 or 4 records out by that time. I think Hellbent was brand new.
yeah.
Stained Class. No, I'm sorry. Stained Class. Yeah, Hellbent was brand new. Stained Class, I think, before Hellbent for Leather, if I'm not right on that
Yeah, I think so.
discography timeline. Okay. The um the interesting thing about that is that, I was still high on Kiss.
Yep.
And right around the same time, AC/DC and Judas Priest come into view via my younger brother, Randy. And so he was bringing this stuff home. He goes, "You're going to love this. I'm just going to tell you, you're going to love this," is pretty much was the calling card there. And he was right. So completely obsessed with Unleashed in the East. I think I listened to it every day that summer and continued to just worship. In the meantime, it's that whole thing about, I went backwards. I
Sure.
think I got Sad Wings of Destiny. I got Hellbent for Leather. I got just anything and everything Judas Priest that I could get my hands on. And to this day, I feel like could still say I get my hand any Judas Priest item I can get my hands on, I probably will,
Yeah.
without breaking the bank anyway. So, um, yeah, it was late 70s, and that's a little bit embarrassing because I feel like I would have loved them earlier. And another sort of thing I feel guilty about is they always came through Texas. Their rise in America, rumor has it they started their tours in South Texas, and I know that I was young, so I wasn't driving. It would have been a thing where, I would have needed a ride, maybe with an older brother or something like that. But I missed them. I missed them in those early days when they came to America, in Texas in particular, as early as 75 and 76. So
Yeah. Yeah.
that's a bummer. What about you?
Yeah, my first, if you're embarrassed about not being turned on to them until the late 70s, I wasn't even aware of them really until British Steel, which was 1980. And I remember a friend of mine had some older brothers that kind of had the cool record collections, and they were sort of the guys that knew what was happening. And through them, it would trickle down to my buddy, who would then turn around and tell me about this stuff. Well, because of them, I bought British Steel on cassette tape. Um, and I'm like you. I was all things. I was all about Kiss. I was all about Van Halen. Ted Nugent was in the mix somewhere, but Judas Priest was a huge discovery for me, because I just remember thinking, wow, this music is so, it was heavy for the time, but it was, looking back in hindsight, it's very, very melodic. But at the time, it was, all I knew was it was heavier than Kiss, heavier than, AC/DC, and more in a metal sense. They were definitely true metal, whereas AC/DC was, to me, AC/DC at that time was still kind of heavy metal, but they didn't sound like Judas Priest. And now, all these years later, I recognize AC/DC as just a loud blues band.
Priest were giving the title definition.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And they wore it proudly, of course, by British Steel. They're wearing the leather and studs and all that stuff. So I remember discovering them and being, I was like, okay, I got to have more of this. And like you, I went back through the catalog and went forward through the catalog, and they became one of the most iconic bands in my collection. And Screaming for Vengeance is one of my top 3 favorite albums of all time. And I'll say this, the last album they just put out, Firepower, was a great record in my opinion. So even all these years later, they're still putting out quality stuff and still carrying the torch. I love the fact that they've always been adamantly heavy metal. They never tried to say we're not a metal band. Oh, we're going to dumb down the metal aspect. They've always said we're a metal band, and I've always appreciated about them for that, because it wasn't always fashionable to say that. It's still not fashionable,
Well,
but
yeah,
they've always waved that flag.
yeah. Thank God. I think that there's so many different layers of you say Judas Priest, comma, why, question mark, right? There's so many layers as to the answer when you ask why. The interesting thing is about, the definition of heavy metal is you open up the book and you look up heavy metal and there's a picture of fucking Judas Priest right there.
Yeah.
The interesting thing to me is when you think about where they're from, they call it the Black Country because of all of the steel mills and government housing and things like that. All those guys grew up in government housing situations more than silver spoon situations.
Definitely.
And I think that plays part into the sound that they would eventually create.
Yeah.
Inadvertently, only because they were searching for something, just like any young, frustrated person, is trying to figure it out. I'm still reading Halford's book, and it's colorful in many ways. And one of the ways it's pertaining to what we're talking about here is the fact that, they went to school, they had things they were interested in. Obviously it was music. And I think that music was a way for them to escape, some disposition, some situational things.
Yeah.
And gave them some artistic meaning.
Yeah.
The one thing that in the Halford book is how I'll speak for Halford because he's not really, he does talk about the other members quite a bit, of course, but man, he was fucked up. He was getting wasted, dude. He loved to drink.
Yeah.
And I think that it's not something that I ever thought about, like, ever.
Yeah.
It's in the 70s and I'm a young person who's barely 12, 13, 14 years old, listening to what now I know to be as heavy metal, because, back then I'm not calling Kiss heavy metal. I'm not calling AC/DC heavy metal, but this, by the time Hellbent for Leather, even Stained Class, when I heard Exciter, I was like, this is heavy metal.
Yeah.
The lyrics are heavy metal. The content here is looking towards something that's you sort of over the top in a lot of different ways, image wise.
Yeah.
And I think that they're part of that whole thing. Different than, I mean, you could say the same thing about, and from Birmingham, England, the same thing as Black Sabbath.
I was going to bring that up.
Yeah, and the lyrics that Geezer was writing and that Ozzy was writing were more doom, and they're writing about the PTSD from the soldiers in Nam coming back and the wars and things like that. So that's very heavy metal topic, but even at that point, when Sabbath even had few records out, even Zeppelin was more of like the beginnings of like what Dio would come to write about, whereas a lot of J.R. Tolkien and breathing dragons and chalices and the Shire and things like that.
Fantastical.
But, still very heavy metal.
Yeah. It's funny that you mentioned Halford, being being a big drinker, because I interviewed him. I've interviewed him a number of times, but I remember talking to him one time, and he said,
So jealous. I have to interrupt you. I'm so jealous that you've gotten to converse with him.
and
He,
he's
I,
always
I,
he's
I,
always been a great interview, very gracious, and
that's amazing.
very forthcoming with, if you ask him a question, he'll give you an answer. And he told me one time, that he got sober around the time of the Turbo record, which was, what, 85, 86 or something like that.
That's right where I am. That's right where I am in his book, and he's talking about that. He went to rehab right after,
Yeah.
and actually tried to commit suicide.
Wow. Yeah. He told me, that he would, by the time he went on stage at night, he'd already drank a case of beer and he'd have another 12 pack sitting on the side of the stage that he was drinking during the show. And when you think about his voice and how many albums he had done up to that point, and how many live shows, it's amazing that his voice wasn't just destroyed by that point, let alone his body, physically. But yeah, he recognized at some point that he had a really bad habit, and he put it down, and he's been sober ever since. And I was always shocked to find that out, because he wasn't one of these guys that was very public about, being a wasteoid or whatever. Some of these guys, they almost wear it as a badge of honor. But it's kind of like when I found out Alice Cooper spent, a good bit of the late 70s all coked out and, and drunk. And, he spent so much of his career saying, not really, not denying it, but it was just never a topic of discussion. So you never really thought about it. And Halford was kind of the same way, in my opinion. But for him to have done as much classic work as he did under those circumstances for as long as he did was pretty remarkable. And then hats off to him for recognizing his situation and deciding to do something about it. And he's still kicking to this day.
Yeah, alcohol wasn't his only vice. So
Right.
he was coked out as well.
Yeah. Which is another thing that'll just destroy your voice, I would imagine.
Oh
so,
yeah. Yeah, I can only imagine there's a lot of personal pain, and he was really he was just trying to figure stuff out, you know what I mean? He's in a weird position in a kick-ass rock and roll band, ultimately.
Yeah.
The records, the story of Judas Priest is not really any different than any other band that we know and love that has the awards, if you will. Rockarola, they didn't make any money. The first tour was a flop. They didn't have any definition yet as to what it was. They just were writing the best songs that they could write. They had just put the band together, so to speak. They were all in different working bands, and they were all teenagers. So when you think about that, they're not any different than anybody I know that has been playing music since they were 13, 14, 15, such as I have. Some honorable mentions. Halford was once in a band called Lord Lucifer.
Awesome.
Yeah, that's what I thought. And Glenn Tipton was in a band called the Flying Hat Band.
Not so awesome.
Not so awesome. And but it all had to come from somewhere. And I think that Halford's introduction to the Judas Priest, to the priesthood, to coin a phrase, to borrow a phrase from Halford's book, was through his sister Susan, who was dating Ian.
Right.
And ended up they got married. I don't think the marriage lasted very long, but they got married, so they were actually related by marriage for a while.
People should know that Halford wasn't the original singer. There was a guy named Al Atkins or something like that.
Yeah, they were, and there might have even been another singer before that. But there's some old promo photos. There's some old interesting artifacts that anyone can find about old Judas Priest. I don't know if they actually wrote or recorded any. It could have been just covers. Maybe they had some original material and no one would know it. If there is some material out there, it'd be fun to listen to, but I'm sure it's pretty rickety sounding,
Yeah.
To
But
hear
for all,
to hear Judas Priest without Rob Halford is almost a sin in my eyes. No disrespect to Tim Owens, otherwise known as Ripper, who is probably one of the best singers in the world, and I can't imagine anybody else fronting Judas Priest other than Rob Halford. So sue me, right?
yeah. I mean, for all intents and purposes, Rob was there from the first album and for every album other than the two that Ripper did. So you couldn't fault anyone for not knowing about Al Atkins. But you're right. Rob was brought into the band because of Ian Hill and some relationship with a sister or something like that. Kind of brought Rob into the band just in time to record the first album, and the rest is history, as they say. One of the things that I mentioned British Steel earlier, and in one of the interviews I did with Rob, we were talking about that album specifically because they were touring in celebration of the 40th anniversary of that album, maybe. And so the topic, of course, during the interview was the British Steel record. So I'm picking his brain about the creation of that record. And it was actually recorded in a house that used to be owned by John Lennon and Ringo Starr. And I think Lennon owned it first and then he sold it to Ringo. Somehow the two of them both occupied that house at one time.
Okay. John and Yoko lived there for a while.
Yeah. So
John,
maybe it was Ringo's house and they just lived there for a while or something like that.
Yeah.
But that's where British Steel was recorded. And so he was telling me about the making of that album. And back in those days, you didn't have samples and stuff. So in the song Breaking the Law, where you hear the glass smashing and the police sirens going, he told me that back in those days, because you had no samples and you couldn't just pull this up on a computer, you actually had to create or record or both your own sound effects. So they would, drink beer out of a bottle, and then they would, stack up enough beer bottles, empty beer bottles, and throw them against the wall to get the smashing glass effect. And so the smashing glass that you hear in Breaking the Law is actual beer bottles being smashed up against a concrete wall at Ringo Starr's house. Right. And then another thing, the same album, British Steel, the song Metal Gods, where you hear that marching noise, this that's actually a drawer full of silverware that belonged to Ringo Starr that they were sort of shaking and jostling around to get the silverware to sort of rattle against, each other. And that's the noise you hear in the intro and the outro of the song Metal Gods. It's Ringo Starr's silverware. I always thought that was cool because I've listened to that album since I was a kid, and I would have never known that if I wasn't talking to Rob Halford himself, and he's giving me this inside information. So I thought those were cool little footnotes about a great album.
Yeah, there's another one on there. Rob is famous for the bullwhip, and it might be on Metal Gods as well. There's like a crack of a whip sound, and it might even be on that line, marching in the streets, something like that.
Yeah.
And what that is actually ended up being a guitar cable, just like completely just whipped on the pool table, on the billiards table.
Yeah.
And that's under that green felt, it's a hard marble surface, right?
Yeah.
So it's probably was pretty wicked loud, and I can just see microphones all pointing down on the cutlery while he's shaking the cutlery, and on the microphones point, all right, mic up the pool table. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So we're gonna destroy the pool table with this guitar cable. But I think he tried over and over and over to get a good bullwhip crack, and it just didn't. The mic, it wasn't loud enough. He couldn't get it to to sound right. Also, I think they were all living there in that house while they were recording.
Yeah, I think
And
so.
there's a part in Rob's book where Glenn is downstairs trying out some amps, and Rob's upstairs trying to sleep, and he comes down in his robe and says, "Hey man, what, I'm trying to sleep." And is like, I mean, the hours were probably all jacked up anyway, because he was probably sleeping in the day, who knows.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I think that all of those are super famous, like lore, right? It's like those are the stories you want to hear about the records that you love that you just didn't know. And I feel like that these are things that that metalheads are going to be talking around, the fire, telling stories around the fire for years to come.
Well,
I
for
don't
me,
know
it's
about
for me,
young
it's like I'll never be
generations
able to.
doing that, but I know dudes our age are doing it right now.
Yeah, and it's like now that I know those things, I'll never be able to listen to those songs the same way. You know, every time I hear Metal Gods, I think about rattling silverware, and every time I hear those beer bottles smashing, I'm thinking Rob Halford is probably on his 25th beer that night, and they're still throwing him against the wall, trying to get just the right smashing sound.
Right.
And people just take it for granted in this day and age. If you need a smashing glass sound, you punch it up on your computer, and there you have it. But back then, you had to create your own sound effects, and by whatever means necessary, I guess. So, what was your first Judas Priest concert?
I am, once again, I'm guilty of it. I just feel like it was just way too late, but it was probably around the time you saw them, and that would have been 82 or 83 on Screaming for Vengeance.
Ah, okay. I didn't see him till Defenders of the Faith, so you
Okay,
got me
so
beat.
that was right after. I'll only beat you by a year and a half. I was at that as well. We've talked about that Screaming tour many times on the show. Great White was the support act.
That was the Defenders tour.
Oh, that was Defender. So no, so it would have been Heaven. The band Heaven was the support act when they came through Texas on Screamer for Vengeance tour.
I want to say
And,
Crocus was on that bill too. Was Crocus?
yeah, not when I saw him. It was only a 2-band bill, and it was Heaven and Priest at
You
Frank
see him
Erwin Center in Austin,
based
Texas.
on Austin. Okay.
I've been in Austin since '80. So
Okay. So yeah, so your first Judas Priest show was Screaming for Vengeance. Mine was Defenders of the Faith. Um, what'd you think of Firepower, their last album that came out like 2 years ago?
I am a terrible, terrible. Here I am talking about how much I love Judas Priest, and I couldn't name one song off of Firepower. So let's talk about that for just a minute. I mean, am I a poser? Am I lame? Am I fired from the fandom of Priest? Am I don't really think so, because
Oh,
there would be no me without Judas Priest, and especially Rob Halford, because much like Freddie Mercury and Steven Tyler and Bon Scott and Brian Johnson and John Bush and Alice Cooper, and those are my influences.
yeah.
And as far as vocals go, all of them. I mean, I love Mark Storace as well, but those were late, a little bit later for me. John Bush is a big influence, but it's later. That's mid '80s, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And but I just think growing up hearing, before I was even a singer, I was just like, how in the hell are these guys, doing this? It's what I would say about many singers, but especially Rob Halford,
Yeah.
because you hear Robert Plant and you're like, oh, that's just crazy. That's almost cartoony, but he's making it work with this rock music, singing so high. And come to realize, I feel like Ian Gillan was who they were all sort of borrowing from, you
Yeah.
know. So there's a genesis there, and of course I always say this: got to wait for that Deep Purple episode.
Yeah.
It's going to be a doozy.
Yeah.
But you know, my first time of seeing them, I was completely blown away. I knew every song. You know, there wasn't a song that they played that I hadn't heard and didn't love already. Of course, that was when you think about. This is kind of an interesting sort of side note here is, so in 83, 82, 83, they had barely been a band for 10 years.
Yeah.
So that's like, when you look at it in those terms, they're a new band.
Yeah.
Who are doing extremely well and had become Americanized with the release of British Steel. And
Right.
so for them to be able to go out and play those huge hits off of British Steel, oh, and here's some of our new stuff, that is like, they give them the key to the city, you know.
Right. Well, one of the things in one of my interviews with Rob, he was talking about, and this is fairly typical of a lot of bands in the 70s, but if you go and you actually look at the discography of Judas Priest, they were literally putting out an album every year, sometimes two a year, and touring in between. So he was talking about, what a grind that was. And if you stop and think about it, that's a lot to ask of any human being, to just be constantly churning out product and being on a bus and living out of a hotel and getting in a studio and trying to write either on the road, or you probably are writing mostly on the road because you're never off the road. And so if you take the first 10 years of Judas Priest, I mean, it was nonstop, balls to the wall.
Working
Hard,
extremely hard.
yeah. Yeah. So I already told you that my favorite Priest album is Screaming for Vengeance. What's yours?
I hate it when you do that, Dave.
I only do it because listeners want to know.
No, I know that, and it's the reason we have a show. So you
can only pick one.
it totally sucks because there are moments on so many records that I just can't live without that
Sure.
become my DNA. But this is messed up for me to say sometimes, but it's Unleashed in the East because it reads like a greatest hits of the formidable beginnings.
Yeah.
That were so staple. Those songs are staple.
Yeah.
Every song on there is Judas effing Priest.
Yeah.
And without those songs, there would be no Screaming. Without songs, there would be no Painkiller. I think that, to talk about the records that don't stick out to me as their greatest moments without them sounding like my opinions, I like to hear what the band says about them, and the only go-to I have is Confess, Rob's book.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier during the Turbo, the year they were making that record and the struggles that Rob was having, personal life and just with him just being wasted. I think by the time they were on tour, he was okay. He was happy.
Yeah.
And, but during the making, they were making, they recorded a bunch of that at the record plant, which I've recorded at, which I didn't realize until the book and didn't read the fine print hard enough or just didn't recall.
Yeah.
But I thought that was cool. I had a moment, reading Rob's book where a record plant, I know the record plant,
Yeah.
Hey, I'm cool,
Yeah.
But it was just one of those cool things, realization. And, I don't like Turbo Lover. I don't like the record. I don't know what else to say other than if it be those digitized MIDI guitars that sound like keyboards. I don't know if it's the songwriting, but it's easier for me to be honest about not digging Turbo after hearing Rob spill the beans in the book about how his lyrics, he cringes when he reads the lyrics or thinks about the lyrics for that record.
Yeah.
He wasn't very happy. He didn't have in the early years, he had this trusty old thesaurus that he carried around with him, and he used it to write. You said it. They were making so many records during that short amount of time that he always had that thesaurus with him, and that was like he was a priest reading of the Bible. That was his Bible, because he read the title Hellbent for Leather right out of that thesaurus, and he was like, "Hey Glenn, check this out, Hellbent for Leather. What do you think of that?" Says it's in this thesaurus just as one. It's like this is helping me just be me. It's helping create Judas Priest.
Yeah.
Thesaurus during
great album title. That album in America or elsewhere was called Killing Machine, correct?
Right, but there's trial and tribulation and do's and don'ts and whys and why nots in the book that talk about that those arguments as well.
Yeah.
He didn't have his thesaurus, is my point, on Turbo. So Turbo is not a winner for me. Ram It Down is not a winner for me.
Yeah, I can honestly say I've never even heard Ram It Down.
Wow.
But I suspect that I'm not missing much. That might be terrible to say, but I
can we say that might be Scott Travis's first record with them?
I thought Painkiller was, but I could be wrong.
No way.
No?
I think it's Ram It Down.
Okay, maybe it's Ram It Down. But see, there you go. That I just proved my own point. I don't know that album well enough to even be able to tell you that, because I lost it after Turbo.
Yeah, okay. So you're there's some gray there.
Yeah, there's some gray there, because by the time Turbo came out, I was kind of disappointed. I was very disappointed, to be quite honest, and I really kind of, and as a younger kid, you're real quick to jump on the next thing that comes along. That's why if I look at my life and I go from Kiss to Van Halen to AC/DC to Iron Maiden to Judas Priest to Metallica, I always think of those as blocks of time. But if I actually think about it as an adult, those time periods were really only windows of maybe 3 to 4 years each. That's how quick things go. So if I lose interest in Judas Priest at the point of Turbo, now, and granted, I'm kind of, maybe this is bad to say too, but I'm already satisfied that they've given me 8, 9 great albums. So it's okay. I'm ready to cut them loose, kind of thing. And maybe that's not fair to say either, but they really didn't come back around for me until Painkiller, which was a huge comeback in my opinion.
That makes so much sense, though, but that Turbo and Ram It Down be these lost years for even me. But I feel like timeline and discography, I feel like we're almost missing a record. What was the record before Painkiller?
Before what? Oh,
Painkiller.
Before Painkiller. Oh, geez.
See what I'm saying?
Yeah, there's that everything after Turbo is just a gray area for me. I get lost in the fall.
I don't think that we're missing a record. I think it's Turbo, then I think it's Ram It Down, and then I think it's that they took a little bit of time, not much, to get Painkiller going.
Yeah, and someone will let us know if we're skipping something, I'm sure.
Oh,
but
it's gonna.
But let's talk about Painkiller, because what a roaring comeback after a couple of basically disappointing records.
As long as we get to talk about some of the records that we didn't really elaborate on.
Oh yeah, sure.
Okay.
I thought Painkiller was not only a return to form, but I loved the fact that Rob and the guys, I don't know, and it might say in the book, you're the one reading the book, but um, I feel like they felt like they had something to prove because in that gray area between Turbo and Ram It Down, all of a sudden Metallica and Anthrax and Slayer and Megadeth are starting to take hold. So it's like if you're going to compete in the metal realm, you now have to compete with these bands that are faster, harder, louder, and Judas Priest came back and answered the call. I thought Painkiller was a great album at that time, considering the climate, for heavy music. They didn't come back. It would have been a little odd if they came back with, say, a British Steel or a Point of Entry, which they could have because they're Judas Priest. But I like the fact that they rose to the occasion and said, all right, we're going to come back with something that can stand up to what is considered heavy music today. And then they took out Megadeth and Testament on that tour. That's balls, man. I thought that was great.
Well, they took out Pantera in like 89 or 88. They had Slayer as a support act. I saw Slayer open for Judas Priest in Los Angeles at, I want to say, the Forum, and that was the Ram It Down tour, and I sat next to Slash at the mixing desk.
Wow,
it's crazy, man.
And if they took out Slayer on the Ram It Down tour, that's big balls.
Well, they took out Pantera too. So,
yeah.
They did. Well, they did. I think they did Europe with Pantera supporting.
That speaks volumes about Judas Priest and especially Rob. Because I always liked the fact that when he left, I want to get to that band, to that project that he did called Two in just a minute. But while we're on the same thread of kind of stepping up to the plate when the bands around you are getting heavier than you were. I love the fact that when he came back with Fight, it was just like, oh my God, this guy, it's like Fight was a fierce band, and Rob Halford at that point is a much, older in age, and he's coming back with some of the heaviest music he's ever done. And I always tipped my hat to him because I thought that was great that he came back with a young, hungry band, and they went out there and were ready to compete with the Panteras and the Slayers and stuff at that age.
I feel like it the new metal was influencing him.
Right, exactly. That's
enough to where when he did quit Priest in 91, would have been late summer or just late 91. I think that he had already had a plan, in place, because he probably started writing with people in Phoenix, where he lives.
Where he lived, yeah.
And probably he has a lot of friends in Phoenix where he's living that are metal people. That he talks about hanging out with the band Surgical Steel quite a bit. And they were on they had a song on one of the old Metal Blade, Metal Massacre records. And so he knew anyone who was metal and who was a musician that was from the same, genre as him. It was easy for him to find them and respectfully.
Yeah.
Real quick, my fact checker here, just to give you a little bit of a rundown. It's not a complete discography here, but starting from Sin After Sin, which was 77, that's missing Rock-a-Rolla, Sad Wings. Here you go. So Sin After Sin is 77, then Stained Class, then Killing Machine, which is Hellbent for Leather, that's 78. British Steel is 80. Point of Entry, 81.
Right.
Screaming for Vengeance, 82. I knew it was 82. Defenders in '84. So that's 2 years. It's really the first time they took 2 years to make a record.
Yeah, that's incredible.
First time. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they're still not even a 50, they still hadn't been around 13 years yet,
Right.
Defenders 84, Turbo is 86. That just seems early. Another 2 years. So 86, 87, 88 is Ram It Down, which makes total sense. And then Painkiller, which is 90,
Right.
technically 90.
So we're not missing an album before Painkiller.
No, and then the Jugulator and Demolition were with Ripper, and those are 97 and 2001, which makes sense. So there's a little bit of a lull in the Priest catalog between 90 and 97. So, that all of that sounds legit when the drama and the history and the story of Judas Priest and a kid from Ohio getting to play Rob Halford for a few years.
Yeah. What do you know about that project he did called Two? Does the book offer stories about that?
I think that he wrote songs with or collaborated with and he was slated as producer.
Trent Reznor.
Yeah, Trent Reznor, and that record has that sort of Reznor apocalyptic new age, yet still very dark on the side of metal, but it's not really metal.
Right.
I wouldn't go as far to call it devil disco, like when I was talking in another episode talking about White Zombie. But it is industrialized, if you will. It has a lot of that. It's tinged with things that make you think industrial metal or industrial hard rock or whatever. The new sounds that a lot of hard rock was using and getting airplay. I don't think Two saw much light of day at all.
Think so either. Right. But yeah, he's basically admitted that he was heavily influenced by Nine Inch Nails and Trent Reznor and sort of the industrial metal sound of the day, and wanted to dabble in that a little bit. I don't know that I've heard. I think I probably heard the single whenever it came out. I can't even tell you the name of it, but never really explored it. And,
I had the record at one point, but I didn't. I didn't get into it that much, and I wish I still had it. I don't think it's in my collection any longer. I mean, anything with Rob Halford, I try to hang on to, but I'm not quite sure what happened to it. We could do a whole show on Rob Halford. I mean,
yeah,
the band Halford. I mean, he just technically went solo.
Yeah, great.
Local favorite, Bobby Jarzombek played drums on those Halford records.
Yep.
So, there's Fight, which had Scott Travis. There's 2 records of that. And there's 2 or maybe 3 Halford records and a couple, maybe 2 live Halford records. And I got to say, those are amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing heavy metal records.
Yeah, they are. I have the Halford, the first Halford record, and one of the live ones.
Resurrection.
There you go. And the second one I think was called Crucible or something like that.
That is correct.
I don't have that album.
I listened to it a couple of weeks ago. It's so very good.
Is it? Okay. Well, that's a good recommendation coming from you. So, I just always admired the fact that Judas Priest as a band always waved the flag unashamedly for heavy metal, and then when Rob Halford kind of branched out on his own, he had that little sort of left turn with Two, but when he was doing his own thing, whether it's Fight or the solo band, I mean, he just came back just roaring back to at least what Judas Priest was doing, if not heavier, you know? And I think that speaks volumes about his love for metal
Yeah,
and
I don't think it was a contest or something. Like he wanted to get heavier and Judas Priest didn't want to get heavy. I mean, that sounds ridiculous. But I just think that it was one of those moments that, maybe there was something else out there. I mean, he was floored when he heard Pantera. He's talking about it in his book. And so that may have had some kind of influence where, the Painkiller record, even though arguably Painkiller could be their fastest, most brutal moment in Priest, discography, arguably,
yeah.
of course.
Yeah, I'll buy that.
But, Painkiller is a very rounded out record. There's some great songwriting on there. I think Touch of Evil has this sort of shout back to something that could have been on Hellbent for Leather. Maybe I'm standing alone in a field, but I don't think so.
No.
So there's a lot of sort of like moving around on Painkiller that makes it a Judas Priest record, and not just the fact that Painkiller was like, oh, we got to keep up with Slayer and Pantera and be heavy as shit.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily that. But I do think that you're on to something. Like he went into the clubs with those bands. I saw Back Room. I saw Fight at the Back Room a couple of times.
Yeah. I saw Fight open for Metallica. You were probably there, South Park Meadows.
I was there. Yeah.
Yeah. That was the one and only time I saw them. But again, they came out. They were low billed on the show.
I think they replaced Alice in Chains.
They might have. I remember that was a weird bill because Candlebox was on the bill. It was Candlebox, Fight, Suicidal Tendencies, and Metallica, if I recall. That was it. And I just remember Fight came out in the broad daylight, middle of the afternoon. I mean, this is the metal god, Rob Halford, legendary singer for Judas Priest, and he's not afraid to come out in the middle of the afternoon and earn his keep again, and he did it with this band that was just, I mean, they were fierce, man. They came out, they were hungry, and they did a great job putting on a great show and just all business, It was
says a lot about Rob and the ethics and who he really is. Now Judas Priest, when you think about what they mean globally and what they mean when you say when you say AC/DC, when you say Scorpions, when you say Iron Maiden, you have to remember that Judas Priest probably supported AC/DC. As a matter of fact, of course they did. They supported AC/DC many, many times with Bon Scott. Judas Priest opened for Led Zeppelin.
I know this, yes.
It's crazy. And that they only had a couple of records out. They were still a new band, but literally Robert Plant was a Judas Priest fan and contacted them and go, I want them to open for Zeppelin. And that's just and Plant and Zeppelin, they're Black Country as well. They're from the same, part of England that Sabs and Priest are from. Yeah. So that's a kind of a nod. That's a nod.
Yeah. I asked Ian Hill that question. I did an interview one time with Ian Hill and Richie Faulkner. It was the two of them at a show here in Austin, and I was backstage and I was interviewing them, and I asked, Richie, of course, wasn't around at that time. Richie might not have even been born at that time.
I was gonna say, yeah.
In fact, I asked Richie that same night, what do you remember about your first Judas Priest concert? And he said he never even saw him until Ripper was the singer. So that's how young he is. But I asked Ian Hill about the time that Priest opened for Zeppelin. And it turned out that it was one of these situations that was just kind of a happy accident. Like Judas Priest was on tour in America. I think they opened, it was only one or two shows, and it was in Oakland, California. And really, the only reason that Priest was able to do the show is because they missed a flight or something like that. It was a complete, it was not as planned as you might think. It was like, oh, we're available because our plane left without us, kind of thing. And then,
I think Priest was in New York, and they were done with a run of shows or something, and they were scheduled to leave, and the phone rang. They got a phone call. Do you want to open for Led Zeppelin? And on the other end of the states, you're in New York, and they were supposed to do 2 dates, but Robert Plant's son or daughter passed away.
His son died.
Yeah, and he had to catch a flight.
I remember talking to Ian Hill about this, and he was saying, what an honor it was and how incredible it was, because Judas Priest at that time was still basically more or less unknown in the United States, and
it's late 70s. That's late 70s, yeah.
Yeah, they don't have hits. They're not on the radio, and they're getting to open for Led Zeppelin in a football stadium in Oakland, California. And I made the joke that they probably sold more merch at that gig than they sold the entire tour in the United States. And he said something to the effect that I don't even think they had merch at that time,
They probably didn't. They probably didn't. It probably wasn't. Merchandise came later. I don't even know if bands really, maybe some bands did, but I remember in my experiences in the late 70s, my first concerts, there was always merchandise. There's always been merchandise. But I think on that sort of B-level band, and, they're staying wherever they can stay on the pennies they have in their pockets. Yeah. It was still, bread and water at that point.
Yeah.
So to speak.
So listen, we can't talk about Judas Priest, especially with you, without mentioning the fact that, of course, your band Dangerous Toys did a tour with Judas Priest. So tell me, did you have any hang time with the members of Judas Priest? I know that, when you're on tour, people think you're always partying together and hanging out, and I know that's not the case at all, but was there a moment or 2 or 3 where maybe you did get to spend some time with your heroes in Judas Priest because you were tour mates?
Well, I love Rob so much. I would have followed him around like a puppy dog if they would have let me.
Yeah.
But I honestly never saw him at the venue, like just hanging around at any, long enough time for me to just like basically embarrass myself. Right. So, I've been in situations where I could have probably started up a conversation with Rob, and I just got cold feet more than once. And it's not like a self-loathing thing. Like I hate myself, that I'm embarrassed about it. But it's like, I feel, I don't know. I probably would have, I don't know what to say to him. Dude, I love you. You're so awesome. And you freak me out. You're like this incredible human being that obviously has struggled, and you just have had to recreate your human vessel, to just be comfortable. And now in reading his book, I just know more about him now, and it's like, wow, he's even a stronger entity than I ever thought. The sort of like a passing moment where it was a member of Judas Priest were rare. There's one moment where I'll talk about KK Downing. I'm sitting on the back of the drum riser, and I believe Metal Church. It was Metal Church's drum riser because they were on first.
Yeah.
And we would be after Metal Church. And anyway, so I'm sitting on, like the drum throne that is right behind my head. So I'm sitting on the riser, and they're just chilling. And it's me and a couple of road crew, and we're just hanging out. And KK and a couple of other people are just walking by, and they stop to chat. And so KK's literally like 12 inches from me. I'm sitting and he's standing he's just right here. And I'm just like, oh my God, it's KK. I'm just fanboy. I don't know how to act, man. And so, I'm trying to get some conversation in with KK, and this is so lame. I asked him for a guitar pick. I got one. He had one. He goes, I think he goes, you're lucky that I have one, because I don't really carry around picks. He says, I'm telling the truth. And I still have the pick. Of course, it's framed about 12 feet away from me right now. And it's red. It says Judas Priest in gold. It's embossed, and it says KK Downing on it. I don't know what else to tell you, but that was really about it as far as KK goes. There are a couple of other moments that are braggable. I'm kind of going backwards here. I don't remember where we were on tour. We did a lot of dates with them. So the tour was called Operation Rock and Roll. Everyone can look it up and sort of school me on where I was. But there was a night that I had asked Rob's handler, like his guy that he hung around with all the time, and it may have been his partner. I don't recall. And I want to say that it might have been, but anyway, I approached him, and I feel terrible that I don't remember the guy's name, because he was so nice about it. And like I was like, stomping around my dressing room and just creeping the whole time, hoping that the answer would be yes. But what happened is I asked him, I cornered him, and I asked him, hey, do you think I'll apologize now if this sounds terrible for me to ask or being too forward here, but is it possible for me to be side stage when Rob comes off the stage, in his little area? Cause he had his own little space.
Yeah.
When he would come off, and whether it be costume changes, and this sounds like I just wanted to see Rob nude, and that's not the fact at all. But so he goes, yeah, I'll ask him and see what he says. No big deal. Don't worry about it. And I was like, thank you very much. That would be such an honor, and it's just in the presence of the metal god is the way I'm thinking.
Yeah.
Such a fan, right? And he comes, I run into him a few hours later, and he goes, yeah, Rob said, no problem, man. No problem at all. And I was just probably jumping up and down inside, oh my God. So, and all I remember about it is just, I was there, I was just hanging out, and you don't really see the show from where his little area is. Right.
Yeah.
And, so that's a bummer, because it's Rob's lair. It's there's a black curtain, and he comes busting through it, and then you're standing there, and you're like, oh my God, there's Rob Halford right there, And I'm 5-6 feet away from him, and I'm just going, I'm just giving thumbs up, going, sound amazing, man, sounds amazing. And he's like, thanks, if even that, right?
Yeah.
Because he's busy, he's at work, and here's this, if he's at McDonald's making French fries, I'm bothering him, standing there next to him, watching him do his job,
Right. Salting the fries.
Right. So that's kind of embarrassing, right? So anyway, it was just an honor to be able to just be in his lair, hanging out as he's coming back for, just a drink of water, or to just catch his breath, or sit down for a moment.
Yeah.
Or change jackets, whatever it was.
Yeah.
But it was some people would say that's very anticlimactic, Jason. And I'm like, to you, I didn't really expect anything. I
Right.
was not looking to become his best friend.
Right.
It was just like, wanted to be there and support and like just see it and just see
Sure.
the happenings of what Rob Halford does when he goes back there. Is he still warming up? Is he drinking hot tea? You know what I mean? I'm a singer. I was on tour with Judas Priest, damn it.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was important to me.
Well,
I got
that's a glimpse behind the scenes that nobody gets,
absolutely,
So sure.
absolutely. Yeah.
Sure. It sounds anticlimactic, but I can see myself being excited about that. It's like, wow, this is what he does when he comes off stage. Nobody else gets to see that, even
That's
if
right.
it's something, uneventful. It's still
Yeah.
a perspective that most people don't get to see. So,
It literally is like no one goes in the band. That's not the band's dressing room.
yeah,
That's not, Glenn Tipton doesn't go in there. That's
yeah,
Rob's lair. That's Rob's lair. So
yeah,
uh, his assistant and him, his assistant's just hanging out and I'm hanging out and here he comes. It's like, oh wow. So I think that I waited, the length of a couple more songs and he came back one more time and then I was like, okay, I feel like I'm in the way now, So
yeah,
didn't want to burn out my welcome there. And that's really it. Um, there was a couple of press days pre-tour, right? So I'm in Los Angeles. I'll try to make this quick because I know I've been talking for a long time.
No, but I know where you're going with this, and this is a good
I,
story. So
I
tell.
was, me and Mark Gary were in Los Angeles doing some press days for Operation Rock and Roll. I have some photos. It was at the Whiskey. It's, I'm on the Whiskey stage. It's me and Mark, Ricky Rackman, Alice Cooper, and Rob Halford. Where members of Metal Church and Motorhead were, who knows, but they didn't show up.
Right.
So, it probably was a travel thing. I think Lemmy was, he lives there. So I don't know why he didn't. I don't know why he didn't show up, but it was in the morning. That's probably why right there. And so anyway, I'm on the Whiskey stage, me and Mark with Ricky Rackman, Rob Halford, and Alice Cooper. By God damn it!
Yeah.
So I think that is a shining moment in my life. But it gets better. We are doing some photo opportunities, and since the name of the tour was sort of a spin-off or a takeoff on Operation Desert Storm was happening at the time,
Yes.
the summer of '91. So there are tanks and jeeps and maybe one tank and one jeep, and me and Mark were riding on the roll bars of the jeep and behind the tank, right? And Alice and Rob are in the tank and they're popping their heads out. And there's, there's photos and people video and in the whole street, traffic's pulled over and these tanks going down the middle of Sunset, and it was crazy. Somebody, I guess the press agents, right, for the tour or for Judas Priest was like, hey, why don't you get, you're one of the other singers. Why don't you get up there with Alice and Rob, yell the three singers, be up there. And I was like, oh my God. Right. And before I could even react and like start crying like a little kid, I was on that tank and I was sitting up there and there's a photograph that I have framed and it's Alice and Rob and me. And in that, when I look at that photograph, I think the same thing every time I look at it. And what's going through my head. What's going through your head there, Jason? Try to be cool. Try to be cool. Try to look cool. Try to look cool. Try to look cool. You're riding on a tank down Sunset with your idols.
Yeah.
And not many people. If Lemmy would have been there, I could have died the next day a happy man. So.
Yeah. No, I've seen the photo, and that's an amazing memory and a great story. I know that's got to be a proud moment in your life and your career, because I know how much you love Rob Halford and Alice Cooper, and to be like squashed between the two of them in a tank rolling down Sunset Boulevard, that's pretty badass.
It's kind of an unbelievable story. It sounds made up. It's not made up. Yeah, I was lucky. So there's one more thing. I was to go to a studio nearby. I wish I remembered the name of it. This is almost like a dream, because I was only there about 30 minutes, maybe closer to an hour, but it was me and Rob, and we're in this studio, and he's going first. He's in the recording booth, and there's, he's reading these, radio station IDs. He's doing station IDs that we're going to play, where they're going to play this ID. Hi, this is Rob Halford from Judas Priest, and da 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 da, and we're coming to Phoenix, and and then they play a Priest song. Well, they were going to do the same with my tags as well. So I'm literally in there watching Rob do this, and then he leaves, and it's like, now I'm going and do mine. It was, once again, anticlimactic. The fact that I was there in a studio with Rob Halford, just going in right after him to do the same radio station IDs was a pretty big deal to me. It was work, this is a little bit about what you have to do, when you're promoting a tour and things like that. But it wasn't work to me.
Yeah.
At all. So.
No, that's awesome. That's amazing. You mentioned KK Downing earlier, and I wanted to share another little KK Downing story, sidebar. I interviewed him once as well, and I had read somewhere that during the Turbo tour, all the photos of him performing live from that tour, and it's that tour because the getup is all glittery and sequins and everything. He's wearing sunglasses in all the photos, and typically, you look back at the photos of Judas Priest on stage, you don't often see KK wearing sunglasses all the time.
Right.
So I asked him, what was that all about? And he told me that somewhere in the early part of that tour, how guitar players, when they tune their guitar, they have that leftover string hanging off the headstock, and they typically cut it off with wire cutters, right? Just to shorten it so it's not, flopping around.
Your guitar tech is supposed to do that if you're KK Downing, right?
Yeah. KK should have someone doing it for him. But for whatever reason, they weren't cut short enough, and he actually caught one of those right in the eyeball. Oh, and he said that his eye was all swollen up and oozing green pus and gunk and stuff. And so the reason that he wore those sunglasses throughout the Turbo tours, because he had the gnarliest eye infection or whatever, because he stabbed himself in the eye with a guitar string that wasn't cut short enough. And so I always thought that was kind of an interesting thing, because if you notice any photos of him from that time frame, he's almost always wearing sunglasses on stage.
That's a serious fan lore campfire story there.
Yeah.
KK has a book. KK wrote a book.
Heavy Duty.
Heavy Duty. Do you have that?
Not.
We need to get that.
Yeah.
And talk about Judas Priest for another 10 hours. Yeah. After I finish Rob's book and you finish that one, or I'll let you borrow this and you let me borrow Heavy Duty, and we'll do this again. There is let's do a smash it or trash it, Judas Priest. You ready?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay.
Be unrehearsed. Do it.
Give me your smash it or trash it of point of entry.
Smash it. I won't trash it. Yeah, smash it or trash it. Smash it means good, correct?
Yeah. Do you love it or do you hate it?
Yeah. Okay. I can't say that I love it, but I certainly won't trash it, and I'll tell you why. For the song Desert Plains Alone.
It's a beautiful song.
It's a magnificent song, man. I mean, it is phenomenal. It's such a great song. And the thing I hate about when they do it live is they speed it up, and it totally loses the whole beautiful vibe of that song. What I love about that song is the vibe that it creates, and that has everything to do with the cadence of the song and the rhythm of the song. And they have this tendency when they play it live to speed it up, and it kind of ruins it for me.
Yeah.
So that album, I'm going to give it a thumbs up for that song alone. And there's other songs on it that are worthy, but that song is one of my favorite Judas Priest songs because it does have such a vibe. And by the way, since you brought it up, our buddy Patrick Kennison does a really killer acoustic version of that song where he's just, singing a cappella. He's by himself with an acoustic guitar. People can look him up on YouTube. He does a lot of acoustic solo videos on YouTube, but as talented as he is, that's one of my favorites from him. But yeah, I'm going to give a Point of Entry a thumbs up.
Yeah, you mentioned there are other songs, and they actually made a couple of different. They made not just one. They made a video for Hot Rockin'. They made a video for
Don't Go.
Don't Go. Yeah, Don't Go. Yeah.
Out to the Highway.
Yeah, Heading Out to the Highway. So they, the video age was that that was pre-MTV.
Heading Out to the Highway was on MTV. I remember seeing.
Well, there was the video was around pre-MTV.
So
that record was 1980.
Yeah.
81. I'm sorry, 81. So they were making sort of like video clips or promo clips or whatever you want to call them prior to the totally over the top, explosion of MTV.
Yeah. I always loved the Heading Out to the Highway video, and I love the scene right at the end where Rob is wearing a white t-shirt and he's kind of got that bandana in his hands. And as he's shouting out the last note, he just kind of collapses from the waist up, just kind of falls over. And I just always love that image of him because you normally see him in a black leather jacket, and there he is in blue jeans and a white t-shirt. And he's just like, he's got that bandana and he's just like, that note is fading out. And I just love that image of him.
He's, his stage persona and what he's doing. I mean, everybody else in the band is fairly stoic. I think, especially Ian. But in the guitar play between, we haven't really even talked about the guitar play between those two guys how important that is to heavy metal.
Yeah.
Not that they did too many harmony solos. They did quite a few, but it wasn't like something that it was something they visited every once in a while. It wasn't like a total staple, like it would be maybe with even, maybe about as often as Thin Lizzy, maybe, but it was definitely a duo. The Tipton Downing thing is definitely a guitar duo, which was not new to them, but something that would later come across with, around the same time as Thin Lizzy, I guess, but would later pack a wallop with Iron Maiden and those guys and the harmonies that they do. I mean, you just say the Trooper. Like the thing that the guitar play in that is this total harmonized part that is the hook of the song. I mean, that is huge, and it that's a staple now. It has to be. So I think Priest had that and gave that to heavy metal, but maybe not created it. Is all I'm saying.
Yeah, but they might have. You could argue they perfected it or enhanced it at least, but yeah, they once Priest kind of did it and then Maiden did it, then you almost couldn't have a metal band without two lead guitarists, whether or not they played harmonies or not. It was just the look of the band. It's like every metal band went from a 4-piece to a 5-piece,
Well, except for Van Halen and Pantera, and there's exceptions to the rule by way of tone of the band. I feel like Wishbone Ash is something that a band that Judas Priest sort of admired for the dual guitar stuff that's going on. And that they were an important band to Judas Priest because, Judas Priest was a 4-piece band for a long time. It was before they had a record deal, simple. Yeah. But it was when Glenn was in Flying Hat that they were a 4-piece. But, I think that Solar Angels is another song from the record that's an incredible moment. And it's important to, Heading Out to the Highway has the harmony guitars, has the dual guitars.
Yeah.
That's the song on that record that has the guitar harmonies on it.
That's kind of one of their underrated records for sure. And I think some of that is because it was sandwiched between British Steel and Screaming for Vengeance. So it's like, it's in the middle of these two iconic, super, super classic defining, not just Judas Priest defining, but genre defining albums. And so Point of Entry kind of gets lost in there. And maybe it's not as, as great an album as the two I just mentioned. It's probably not, if I'm being honest, but it's definitely not a stinker. It just kind of gets overshadowed by two monumental albums on either side of it.
If you think about the workload and you think about where they were, it's their record where they could say, we were in between things. Those things might be greatness that they're in between, which is British Steel and then Screaming for Vengeance. Well, what's in between that? It's Point of Entry.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, I think that they recorded that in the Bahamas. I think they recorded quite a few things in the Bahamas, and they were just going crazy. They were drinking and partying and taking boats out. They were going fishing. Can you imagine Judas Priest guys going fishing? They went fishing.
Yeah.
I think they were making turbo in the Bahamas too, and they were trying to go fishing. He talks about the guy who rented the boat says, don't go over there because you're going to hit the coral and it'll break my propellers. And they were like, yeah, whatever. And they went right over there and broke the propellers immediately. And they had to pay for it. So
they said, send the bill to my manager.
Well, whatever it was. Yeah. They, but it was, I think that they were just, they had to discover the great moments. I don't think that they were always there and just so easy to come by. But, Rob swears by the thesaurus, and he always gives credit to Glenn and KK and saying that they always delivered great material. He does say he wishes Turbo. He thinks he fell short on that because of his personal stuff was getting in the way of that being a great record. And he says that he loves the music, but he just blew it on his side of things on that record. Like I said a minute ago, we could talk about Judas Priest and what they mean to us and just what they mean to music. And it's very, very important. I feel like there would be no Metallica without Judas Priest.
Oh, I
feel like there would be no Iron Maiden without Judas Priest. And we can just stop right there.
Yeah. And exactly. Right. Yeah. Yeah. We all of us fans of heavy music owe them a huge, huge debt of gratitude that we could never repay. And so many bands would say the same thing. And, we started off this show by saying we could go on and on and on about Judas Priest, and we could. But I think we need to wrap this one up and maybe revisit the subject at another time, because Judas Priest is, there's a lot of stories to be told. And maybe when you finish that book, you'll have even more side notes to share. And if we ever read the KK book, we might have even more information. So great topic. I knew it would be. I mean, how can you go wrong with Judas Priest? We could talk for hours, but let's move into our final segment for this episode, Shot of Rock and Roll. we all know that you're a hard rock, heavy metal guy, but we also know that you're a songwriter and a fan of all types of music, and your ears are pretty wide open to a variety of different sounds and music, as long as it's good at the end of the day, right? So I wanted to ask, what concert have you gone to that people would be surprised to know you attended? Something outside of the hard rock and heavy metal realm.
I can't think of one off the top of my head. I can't even think of one off the top of my head. I saw I went and saw a like a radio sponsored, radio station brought a bunch of bands. It was like all the bands flew in and played this promotional type of shows, a bunch of different kinds of bands. And it might have been 2000. So, it's 21 years ago or something. Might have been that long ago.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I don't think it was in 99. I'm going to say 2000, maybe 2001. Anyway, I am a big fan of that very first Kings of Leon record.
Ah.
And I can't even remember the title of the record. I'm going to blow it. It's like something like Of Man or Manhood or something like that.
Yeah.
Stories of Man and Manhood or something like that. Something. Anyway, that's not important. I was obsessed with that record. It was stuck in my CD player for months. Yeah. And it just sounded like a dirty old rock and roll record. It was recorded that way. It sounded that way. The image of the band I had in my head was they're all sons and cousins of a Pentecostal preacher in like Tennessee or Arkansas or something like that. Right. And so it that even made it more sort of punk rock to me, that it was these like inconspicuous rock and roll kids,
unlikely rockers. Yeah.
And they were like came out of nowhere, to me. And the songs could have been like a spawn of like Rolling Stones meet Leonard Skinner or something like that. It was just really weird.
Yeah.
The hit was Molly's Chambers.
Yes.
And I didn't hear it on the radio. I was working in a record store at the time. And, we would throw all the promos into this giant CD rack and spin it around, and whatever came out would come out. So I discovered a lot of cool stuff that way. And, man, one of those songs came on. I was like, and it kept coming on, different song every time, and I was like, because it was on a mix, right? I'd hear, some hip hop crap, and then I'd hear Kings of Leon, and then I'd hear some new metal band that I didn't give a crap about because it was just like, what the hell is that? And then another Kings of Leon. I was like, man, what is that? And I'd go dig it out, see what it was. Every time I was, stop and listen like a confused dog. What is that? It was that damn Kings of Leon record.
Yeah.
So they came to town on one of those
radio festival.
101X is 101X is this alternative rock station in Austin, and they were putting on this big thing, and there was a bunch of bands on there. I don't remember who was on there, but Kings of Leon was on there, and that's all I cared about. Is I went and saw Kings of Leon one time at Stubbs Barbecue. It was packed. It was during the day, right? It was just a big thing they were having.
Yep.
And they only played like 30 minutes. And I don't think that they looked like they just got off the plane.
Yeah.
They looked like hell when they walked out. I don't think they were playing on their equipment.
Yeah.
And they just came out and played like half their record, basically. They just had the one record. and they sounded like a punk rock band. To me, they were playing their songs, but they were kids, and they were hungry, and they were dirty, and it meant something to me. And no one else really in the audience, maybe like 20 out of like 800, even gave a shit. People were facing the other way and looking the other way and just kind of having a conversation in the audience, because it was outdoor, right?
Right.
I was beeline. My eyeballs were glued to the stage, and I just thought they were great. And then the new record came out a year later, or 6, 7, 8 months later, after they kind of started to gain some footprint, and I was uninterested. I
Yeah.
was a fake fan, because the second record didn't do it for me, and I don't really know why. I just think that the tone of that first record was something different than everything after that. So
Did you so the radio festival, when you saw them, was it Stubbs?
yeah.
Okay, I was there, and
Oh, cool.
I remember me and Kim, my wife, we were in the dressing room, if you will, at Stubbs with the band, either before they went on stage or after they came off stage. I think it was after, because they were all sweaty and they were
With Kings of Leon.
Kings of Leon. Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I took
a little synchronicity here. A little 6 degrees of separation. Wow.
Yeah. There was a poster on the wall that was a really nice, high quality poster, real slick, full color, glossy. And I took it off the wall, and they all signed it. And I have it here somewhere in my box of stuff somewhere. But I remember you actually turned me on to Kings of Leon when you worked at that record store, because I remember going to visit you at that record store, and you were like, dude, you got to hear this. And we went outside to your van, and you popped in the CD, and I was like, oh yeah, this is cool stuff. And that's probably why I went to the Stubbs gig. And then while I was there, I don't know how I ended up meeting the band and hanging out with them in their dressing room or whatever, but we were just kicking back, drinking beers, and they signed this poster, and I still have it to this day. And I remember just everything you said. It was like this scrappy little band of country boys that was, just rocking, and
no one really seemed to give a shit.
Yeah, not then. Yeah, a couple years later, they were like opening for U2 and stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
kind of crazy, man.
Yeah, no, that's a good story. Yeah, Kings of Leon. I remember you being excited about them, and you turned me on to them, and I understood.
Sweet. Okay, here's my shot of rock and roll for you. Fairly random. When I say, this is kind of a smash it or trash it, I guess. When I say Motorhead Overnight Sensation, do you know anything about that record?
I have it. I do know about it. It's not one of the ones that's in heavy rotation, but I'll tell you right off the bat, I don't think there's such a thing as a Motorhead record that I would trash.
Right. That's why I kind of set it up to be that way. I have a signed copy of that record, and I'm with you. I probably can't name a song or two off of it.
One of the interesting things about that record is it's one of the few Motorhead album covers that actually features the band on the cover.
That's right.
As you know, Ace of Spades, of course, being one of the other ones, but as you know, most of their album covers feature the artwork of Joe Patagno. And the band realizes they're not the most photogenic bunch, so they don't necessarily fight for the camera to be on the album cover. But I have that album. I don't listen to it all the time, but I can't think of a single Motorhead record that just leaves me so disappointed that I'll just say I could trash it. So
right, I didn't think you were gonna trash it, but I was just gonna, it's smash it or trash it is that sort of radio DJ talk for. Hey man, what do you think about this record? So.
You know who does love that record, if I'm not mistaken, is Marty from Lower Class Brats.
He could tell us all about it then.
Yeah,
I like the record too. It's not the top of my heap. I'll talk about Overkill with you.
Well, the Motorhead heap is pretty darn big,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
there's going to be a few titles in there that we're not experts on, but
Yeah, when I start thinking about Overnight Sensation and I think I did a gig with Motorhead on that tour and was hanging out and had them all sign it, but it just makes me want to go put the song Overkill on repeat. Call me crazy.
Why not?
Yeah.
You could do worse. All right, man. Another great show. Enjoyed talking Judas Priest with you. What a topic, huh? We could just go on and on about Priest. But
Priest.
We've got to save some for the next time. And by the way, when you watch this on YouTube, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. It helps us out tremendously. We really need your help in boosting the show, boosting our numbers. And we do appreciate you tuning in and listening. If you do us the added favor of punching that button and leaving some comments for us to respond to, we're happy to do that. We love to have you guys as part of the conversation. All right. With that, Metal Dave Glester, Jason McMaster signing out. Another episode of the Talk Louder podcast. Thanks for joining us.